These are Logia 60 through 88. Logian 76, a parable. The Malkuth of the Father is like a merchant who had a consignment of merchandise and who discovered a pearl. That merchant was shrewd. He sold the merchandise and bought the pearl alone for himself. You too seek his unfailing and unenduring treasure, and enduring treasure, where no moth comes near to devour and no worm destroys. Well, for Yeshua, a pearl symbolized the treasure of soul perfection that was pursued as the highest priority of life. And one of his mashlim, the merchant, and this one and another one that appears in other forms in Q, the merchant sells the merchandise and bought the pearl alone for himself. And another, he sells everything he has and buys the field that contains the pearl. So the pearl developed like it did in an oyster. It was developed in the heart of a human being. It was developed in spiritual halakha and communion with heaven. It is the treasure, the atzad, that accumulates in the heart of each person like the formation of a pearl layer by layer within the soft flesh of an oyster. Now, this mashal emphasized the preciousness of the opportunity to develop spiritual realization through divine halakha and implementing the way of God in life. Like the pearl, this treasure can grow only while in flesh. Once death has come, the opportunity ceases. Therefore, the wise person will make the treasures of God's way his highest priority, not the accumulation of material wealth. This is some of the material from the Hymn of the Pearl, a very, very beautiful Gnostic hymn or Gnostic poetry, and it was probably chanted and it was possibly danced to, that we find in the Acts of Thomas, which is also very early Thomasian material. It tells of the soul leaving from its place in heaven. It has a mission to accomplish. It needs to come down to earth, and it needs to be able to gain the pearl, which is guarded by a great dragon, which represents flesh and the flesh and the ignorance of being in flesh and so on. When a quite little child, I was dwelling in the house of my father's kingdom, and in the wealth and the glories of my upbringers I was delighting. From the east, our home, my parents forth sent me with journey provision. Indeed, from the wealth of our treasure they bound up for me a load. Large was it, yet was it so light that all alone I could bear it. And with me they then made a compact. In my heart wrote it, not to forget it. If thou goest down into Egypt, which represents incarnation and flesh, and thence thou bringest the one pearl that lies in the sea hard by the loud-breathing serpent, then shalt thou put on thy robe, which we'll talk about later in another Logian, and thy mantle that goeth upon it, and with thy brother, our second, in other words, the Bar Enosh, the Christ, thou shalt be heir in our kingdom. Straightway I went to the serpent. Near to his lodging I settled, to take away my pearl while he should sleep and should slumber. Lone I was there, yea, all lonely, to my fellow lodgers a stranger. Now at this point he's a solitary, he's a monk, but he's not alone, he's joined by a guide, another son of heaven. I made him my chosen companion, a comrade for sharing my wares with. He warned me against the Egyptians, against mixing with the unclean ones. For I had clothed me as they were, that they might not guess I had come from afar to take off the pearl, and so rouse the serpent against me. For I had clothed me as they were, that they might not guess that I was come from afar. That is a statement that means basically that he was in flesh like everybody else. He is eating their food. He is doing what they are doing. He's anonymous. He's not allowing himself to appear to be anything more. But from some occasion or other they learned I was not of their country. With their wiles they made my acquaintance, yea, they gave me their victuals to eat. I forgot that I was a king's son, and became a slave to their king. The theme of eating the food of the people of the other country causes you to lose your identity. It was certainly a theme in the diaspora among Jews who were trying not to assimilate, but also among the Gnostics it's a theme. I forgot that I was a king's son, and I became a slave to their king. I forgot all concerning the pearl for which my parents had sent me, and from the weight of their victuals I sank down into a deep sleep. And then his heavenly mother, the Holy Spirit, and Father send him a message that awakens gnosis in him. I remembered that I was a king's son, and my rank did long for its nature. I bethought me again of the pearl for which I was sent down to Egypt, and I began then to charm him, the terrible loud-breathing serpent. Now this would be, in Thomasian terms, the Thomasian preacher who arouses, sends the message, gives the message to people that are drunk and sleepy and unaware and this sort of thing. They're on earth in flesh, meaning that. And the Gnostic message goes right to the heart and reawakens these longings, and eventually they have a convert. And I began then to charm him, the terrible loud-breathing serpent. I lulled him to sleep and to slumber, chanting over him the name of my father, the name of our second, my brother, and the name of my mother, the East Queen. This chanting probably implies that some kind of canting or chanting and the use of divine names was being made of the Gnostic Thomasians, which is to be expected because in Gnosticism there's a great deal made of magical names and so on. And thereon I snatched up the pearl and turned to the house of my father. Their filthy and unclean garment I stripped off and left in their country. That, of course, is his flesh. He's dying. He died, and he leaves it behind. To the way that I came back, I betook me. To the way that I came, I betook me. Your way back to heaven is the way you came down to heaven. To the light of our home, to the dawn land. And on the road I found there before me my letter that had aroused me. As with its voice it had roused me, so now with its light it did lead me. And now he begins to receive the robe, which we'll discuss in another Logia. Now, I want to contrast the Gnostic view versus Yeshua's Kabbalistic view, because Gnosticism is very attractive until you start digging around and finding what it really is all about. So let's make a difference between the Jewish Kabbalistic way, which is very life-affirming and very family-affirming and human-affirming and earth-affirming, and the Gnostic way, which is not. To the Gnostic, God's kingdom is in heaven. It's somewhere else. To the Kabbalist, God's sovereignty is on earth. It has to now be discovered and seen and made manifest. May thy kingdom come means may thy Malkuth appear on earth. May it become manifest. May human beings see it. And the corollary in the Lord's Prayer is may thy will be done on earth. To have a manifestation of God's sovereignty on earth to men is for God's will to be done in the hearts and the institutions of mankind. For the Gnostic, life in flesh was evil, and they believed in abstinence from it. And the Kabbalistic view was that life in flesh is good, and things had to be sanctified. The earth had to be sanctified. The Jubilees rolled by, and we sanctify the earth. So the earth is to be redeemed and sanctified. The whole creation strains forth, awaiting the revelation of the sons of God, not just the one Son of God, but all the different Christs that are to appear in every soul. In the Gnostic view, normal people, like the people in the Egyptians, are filthy and dirty and they're unclean. Normal people are good in Kabbalistic thought. God created the heaven and the earth, and he looked upon his creation of mankind and the earth, and he said, it is good. Now, love was only for your monastic companions in the Gnostic view, and that love was an affection. It was sentimentality. But the Kabbalistic love is chesed, which is to honor and respect and treat with that kind of fairness and honor everyone, even your enemies. In the Gnostic view, redemption was for your own soul. In the Kabbalistic view, it represented liberation for all beings, because the Son of Man, the Son of Mankind, ultimately comes to redeem all humanity and all the earth and all beings, according to the teachings of Yeshua. And that is the way in which Yeshua's religion is universal. Even though he didn't preach to Gentiles, Paul was correct that it did belong for all people. In the Gnostic view, redemption is by gnosis. In the Kabbalistic view, it's by good works. It's by what you do. Not what you say, not what you believe, it's what you actually do. Mitzvot. In the Gnostic view, monks should be isolated. In the Kabbalistic view, life is all about interaction with the community. In the Gnostic view, sex is the thing that destroys your redemption, and you should be celibate and you should abstain from sexuality. You must be sexually ascetic to be absolutely perfect. And that was true not only among the Gnostics, but in the later Manichaeans and so on. And it became true, of course, in the Catholic Church. In the 4th or 5th century, the clergy all had to be ascetic. That was the gold standard for sainthood in the common views of the ancient world. But no, in the Kabbalistic view, there's a great honor of marriage. In fact, the sexual union is seen as ultimately can be, if it's done properly and rightly, can be the highest form of divine union. In the Gnostic view, Godhead is an impersonal progenitor. He's the pater, the father, who is, of course, the mother is not a divine thing. The father is a divine thing because the male is, the masculine is divine, the feminine is corruptible, and the pater, the father, is one who simply generates all things. But in Kabbalistic view, Godhead is a personal progenitor, Abba, Daddy. In the Gnostic view, there must be a radical break from the past, especially Jewish tradition and the God of the Old Testament. In the Kabbalistic view, it's a radical reinterpretation of Jewish tradition and Godhead. It's a midrashic, Kabbalistic interpretation. No, Yeshua did not think that Pharisaic religion could be simply patched up, or it could be even reformed as it was. His reformation was much more radical than that. But still, it was a radical reinterpretation. Yeshua was not against circumcision. He didn't preach against all Jews and circumcision and things as we have in Thomas and even in the Christian documents, the Christian Gospels and so on. He was not trying to overthrow his own religion and culture. He was trying to guide it into the right direction. In Gnosticism, there's emphasis upon secret knowledge. In the Kabbalistic view, there is emphasis upon works and halakha. And in Yeshua's prophecies, he says, what you hear in secret, in private, say on the housetops. In other words, all of this is to come to be known. All the secrets, all the ratzim of heaven are to become known to all. So there is your contrast between a Kabbalistic and Gnostic, and for me it's very easily done to slice the meat from the bone here and make the distinction most of the time. But for a lot of people that don't understand these distinctions, they see and hear beautiful statements from the Gnostics and the Gnostic Gospels and so on, till they start actually doing what they're supposed to do if they believe in that stuff. And I want to show Logia 77 because we have the actual Greek for that. It was actually put in a different place. I think it was Logia 30 or 31 in the Oxyrhynchus papyri, but here it is. In the Greek papyri, the saying about split the wood is attached to Logia 30 about where there are three gods. This word is the all, a Gnostic term, but teraph is tapan. It's a Greek term that is Gnostic. The Coptic word she means dead wood that's already cut. But the Greek word in the Oxyrhynchus fragment is zulon, which in later Hellenistic times meant a living tree. So we have some interesting things to consider here. We have two different versions of this, one from Thomas and one from the Oxyrhynchus. Very often the Thomas has more authentic material, it has seemed so far, but maybe not. Here's what it says. It is I who am the light which is above them all. It is I who am the all. From me did the all come forth, and unto me did the all extend. Now, I think you can probably see that that's not Kabbalistic, that's Gnostic. And then it says, split a tree, and I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me there. The Gnostic says, split wood, and it really means a piece of wood that's already cut. And lift up the stone, and you will find me there. So as much as I love the final lines of this saying that I've separated as 77b, the entire Logian is later Gnostic Christological doctrine. Logian 77a probably has its root in the Johannine I am the light of the world sermon and interprets the Christ Logos as a Kabbalistic Ein Sof Or of creation. 77b seems to reflect the proto-Manichaean idea of Christ as the archetypal soul trapped into matter. And this is found attached to Logian 30, as we said, of the Oxyrhynchus papyri fragments. Now, the spirits of trees were thought to be in their flowing sap, so the translation split a piece of wood isn't quite correct. The saying refers to a live tree. You might remember that Shakespeare's spirit Ariel was imprisoned in an oak tree by the witch Scorox and then released by the magic of Prospero, who threatens to, quote, rend an oak and peg thee in his knotty entrails unless Ariel obeys. Spirits of rocks and the mineral world dwelt near them but not inside, so lift a stone is correct. But in terms of plants and trees, the spirits could dwell inside the trees. In Manichaean Gnosticism, there were two grades. The perfect, or elect, were unmarried ascetic teachers of the community, and the hearers, or instructed, were young or married community members. They were the grunts, and the perfect or the elect were the ones that got to go to heaven. It was believed that divine sparks of Godhead were scattered and trapped into matter by the evil deity, just as we see here, split a tree and I am there. They were hidden in plants and animals and among the stones, and it was vital for salvation to avoid harming or destroying these spirits, but just to walk or eat normally resulted in collateral damage. So for the sake of the elect, the hearers assumed the spiritual debt, the spiritual sin, or responsibility for the harm that the elect caused by walking on bugs and things by mistake and by eating. And so the elect could ascend directly to heaven after death, and this benefited the community. And that was done on the waxing moon, and as the moon grew full, then all the souls of those who had died were there. And as it waned, the souls would fly up into the higher heavens and leave the sublunary world, and so on in Manichaeism. So this Gnostic statement I'm explaining, the ideas of spirit and animation and so on that you find in Shakespeare are very ancient ideas that go back into the ancient world, and so I use them to explain this idea of split a tree and I am there, lift up the stone, you'll find me there. Animistic. (78a) Why have you come out into the desert, to see a reed shaken by the wind, and to see a man clothed in fine garments like your kings and your great men? Upon them are the fine garments. Well, we're very familiar with that. But however, we're not familiar with this, and they are unable to discern the truth. The people who wear the fine garments are the rich people and the merchants and so on, and they are the ones who can't discern the truth. That's a Gnostic statement. Because there was, in the Syrian Gnostic community, there was a serious prejudice against people with physical wealth and who were merchants and so on. So in 78a, which is authentic, Yeshua contrasted the ascetic desert prophet John the Baptist in his camel hair tunic with his critics who wore fine garments. The contrast was to show John's strength of character. He was not a reed shaken by the wind, or that is a collaborator, someone who is copacetic with all the influences around him, including the Roman government and the Herodians and everything. It's a Semitic expression meaning one who is swayed to compromise his principles by the influence of others. So here he contrasted strength, the strength of John the Baptist, with the weakness of character of the Pharisees and the Jerusalem establishment. By the Pharisees, we're speaking specifically of the Jerusalem religious establishment, the Sanhedrin, and so on. And so he's not talking about the virtues of asceticism and the vices of wealth here. He's talking about strength of character. But the added Gnostic conclusion is that the wealthy and powerful, in other words, the antithesis of Gnostic ascetics, are, quote, unable to discern truth. Here the Coptic word me is used for Greek aletheia, as found in Johannine language, meaning spiritual and philosophical truth. The underlying Hebrew idea of emeth does not mean quite the same thing. It doesn't mean discursive truth, because emeth is truth is something that's done and lived, not just said. So the Semitic idiom is best illustrated for this, by the way, in John 3:20-22. Everyone who does evil hates the light and will not come into the light for fear that his deeds will be exposed. But whoever does the truth comes into the light so that it may be plainly seen what he has done and has been good through God. And here doing truth is contrasted with doing evil. So Hebrew truth means what is good and right in the ways of God, and it doesn't mean philosophical speculation or ideas or discursive truth. But the Gnostics understood truth as Greek aletheia, meaning philosophical gnosis. The conclusion that they have added to this devar of Yeshua implies that the wealthy and those who rule society are unable to discern the true gnosis. And this is what we'd expect from ascetic monks who saw merchants and wealthy people as the enemies of heaven, the, quote, Egyptians of the hem of the pearl and the unclean ones, and so on. Logian 79, a woman from the crowd said to him, "Blessed are the womb which bore you and the breasts which nourished you." And he said to her, "Blessed are those who have heard the word of the Father and have truly kept it." And 79b, a completely separate Logian, I mean not Logian, it's the same Logian here, but it's a separate devar. "For there will be days when you will say, Blessed are the womb which is not conceived and the breasts which have not given milk." Now this pericope of 79a, this little story of the woman in the crowd, is known from the special Lucan material. While he was saying this, a woman in the crowd raised her voice and said to him, "Blessed is the womb that bore you and the breasts that nourished you." But he said, "Blessed rather are those who hear the word of God and obey it." So we know that from that particular, that L source material. It's similar to a Markan story. Then Jesus' mother and his brothers arrived, and standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, "Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." So we probably have some conflation here, perhaps in the memory of the person who dictated it. The Lucan pericope may preserve an historical beatitude, which is, "Blessed are those who hear the word of God and do it." The Markan story may reflect another, completely different historical devar, "Whoever does the will of God is my spiritual kin." There's no way to really know because we're going backwards here through time. Now, 79b, Yeshua's prophecy about the catastrophic siege of Jerusalem, is added right in here by the Gnostic, with apparently no knowledge of what it means, totally out of context, to emphasize a Gnostic doctrine. The beatitude about the womb which is not conceived and the breasts which have not given milk means to the Gnostic that those who have not had sexual intercourse and born children, the ascetic monks, will eventually be revealed as the blessed ones. This asceticism, moreover, is implied as the meaning of those who have, quote, truly kept the Father's words. He who has recognized the world for what it really is has found the body, but he who has found the body is superior to the world. The world of Yeshua's Basor and the messianic visions of Daniel, Enoch, and Trito-Isaiah had been corrupted by Shaitan, but it was not evil. It would be redeemed through sanctification and manifestation of divine sovereignty, the coming Malkuth in flesh and on earth. But for the Gnostics, the cosmos, the world or cosmos, was by definition evil. And it is, in fact, in John's Gospel already appearing that way, but that's late. That's coming into the beginning of the 2nd century. The goal of Christ was not to sanctify, in Gnosticism, was not to sanctify the cosmos, but to gather a few elect souls, the 144,000 virgins maybe of the book of Revelations, and lead them home to heaven. Thus, this Gnostic Logian says that one who has recognized the cosmos for what it is, a mere external body of the true life and a place of evil and illusion, is superior to the cosmos. The one who has, quote, found the body, meaning has realized that earthly reality is merely an external shell of reality, becomes superior to the cosmos. Now, much of medieval Christianity had this Gnostic view of the world. The Anglican prayer book still exhorts the newly baptized to, quote, overcome the world of flesh and the devil, which is Johannine. And much that is in Johannine is already tending towards Gnostic views. These are not Kabbalistic views, and they're not original with Yeshua. There is no concept here of reincarnation, and we find no concept of that in most Christian churches anymore. It's rather just a striving for leaving this world behind at death and returning to the heavenly home. And that is characteristic of medieval religion, Protestant and Catholic. Now, certainly Yeshua taught that life does not consist merely of eating, drinking, and material security, and the life of the Olam was interior. The Malkuth of heaven was within and beyond. But for Gnostics, this world was a hell into which we had all been entrapped. It might eventually be overcome through ascesis, that is, asceticism and gnosis, and the Gnostic could then forever leave it behind. It's not unlike the view of what some call Hinayana Buddhism, the earliest form of Buddhism, which was to overcome all one's incarnations and leave the world behind, as opposed to Mahayana Buddhism with its idea of the Bodhisattva, who renounces his right to do that and continues to stay here to help other souls, and his goal is for the redemption of all souls. Until that happens, he won't leave. It's something like that, but that's not really what it's about. The Jewish concept was to sanctify the world, to make it into God's Malkuth. For Yeshua, however, this earthly olam was the proving ground of souls. It was the field of action where human soul could be purified, refined, and perfected by trial and sanctification. It was only by one's walk through incarnate life and conduct in this world, his halakha, that a disciple could grow from newly born child of the Malkuth to mature heir exercising the sovereignty of God. Logian 81. Let him who has grown spiritually wealthy be sovereign, and let him who possesses worldly power renounce it. Now, this saying is presented in the paradoxical terms we've seen in other Devarim. Let him who has grown wealthy rule is contrasted with let him who has rulership abdicate it. It's the Coptic verb arna. The simple chiastic structure alone suggests an easily memorized Devar whose interpretation would be understood by disciples but not easily apparent to outsiders. My translation clarifies wealth as spiritual wealth and power as worldly power or rulership, so that we can understand what Yeshua means, because this is an authentic Devar. Landholders and the wealthy were often known in the Palestinian culture of Yeshua as rulers, and this Devar exploits that metaphor. The idea of those who possess worldly power are renouncing it. Now, Yeshua's exhortation for the one who possessed material wealth and worldly power to renounce them means this today. He did that to the young wealthy man. He said, hey, sell all you have, give to the poor, and follow me. But that was not the condition for discipleship. As I said, Peter didn't sell all he has. Peter was a patron. He supported Yeshua's ministry with his fishing business. He was one of the largest fishing businesses and boats in the area. As a matter of fact, today you can go to ancient Capernaum and you can see what archaeologists think was the house of Peter and the boat of Peter. And he was a pretty wealthy man for a fisherman. And he was a patron of Yeshua. He supported him in many ways and provided food and other things. And his wife traveled with him later on when he was preaching the gospel, according to Paul. So he didn't abandon his family and he didn't abandon his business. And wealth can be gotten quite honorably, according to Yeshua's own mashlim. He tells one parable of the parable of the talents, where the master leaves and he comes back and he's angry at the people that just buried their talents in the ground, their talents meaning their coin, but he praises those who invested it and made money with it. So it's not anti-capitalistic. On the other hand, it's anti-usurious. Charging money for the use of money was something that Yeshua was quite opposed to. But here, when he tells the young rich man that if he wishes to follow him, he has to do this, this is a direction for the young rich man at that time and in that place. Now, what that means for us today, and what Yeshua's exhortation about this means, is that the only way to conscientiously take responsibility for wealth, or to exercise the power of governance, is to share it, to work collaboratively, and to renounce all selfish motivation. The key is non-attachment to possessions and personal power, in subordination to the greater good. In other words, what we do with charity and with power sharing and with democracy fits into this Kabbalistic idea. Let him who has grown spiritually wealthy be sovereign. Spiritually wealthy, the one who has great atzad in the heart, is the one who should be sovereign, and he's sovereign with God. And whoever possesses worldly power, let him renounce that. So you may have a great deal of wealth and riches, but you can act as though you don't own it. You can say, this is my responsibility, and you can do with it what benefits the greatest number of people. That doesn't necessarily mean selling all you have and giving to the poor. After all, Yeshua said, the poor you have with you always. It's part of the reality of the world. Logia in 82, he who is near to me is near to the divine fire, and he who is far from me is far from the sovereignty. If this were composed in Greek, we'd expect the adversative but, Allah, to connect the second clause. Instead, we find the and, which must have been rooted in the Hebrew Aramaic adversative vav. In other words, Logia in 82 has an underlying Aramaic construction. Additionally, both Malkuth and Esh, fire, are part of Yeshua's special vocabulary. This seems to be an authentic and previously unknown devar of Yeshua. Here the fire is divine fire from heaven. As discussed in my commentary to Logia in 10, behold, I have cast fire upon the world. It's not the Greek pur of testing and trial and alchemical purification. The original meaning of the devar made divine fire parallel to Malkuth, so that those who were disciples of Yeshua were near to both. If you're near the fire, you're near the Malkuth. Interestingly, in Chaldean or Babylonian cosmology, which greatly influenced Hebrew thought after the Babylonian captivity, the highest heavens and deities all have the nature of noetic or intellectual fire. There had been a large and active Jewish settlement that spoke Aramaic and occupied the city of Babylon ever since the time of the Babylonian captivity. And in Yeshua's day, it was probably the most sophisticated Jewish metropolis in the world, much more than Jerusalem. And Yeshua probably spent a great deal of time there. The Babylonians developed the first and oldest Targum, and the community was a major Jewish center. And since Yeshua's main affinities lie not with Palestinian, but with Babylonian Judaism and the concept of the Bar Anash and other things developed by the earlier Babylonian Jews, like Trito-Isaiah and so on, the writers of the Enoch school and those of the school of Daniel, it's useful to compare the Zoroastrian or Babylonian or Chaldean cosmology and cosmogony, the generation of the universes, with the Jewish Kabbalistic version. And so we can understand a little bit more about divine fire. As we said before, divine fire is fire that comes out of the sky by lightning and lights a tree or ignites a tree or something. And that was considered to be the most sacred fire to light a temple fire with. But there's other reasons and other ideas of the divine fire, the highest being the fires of heaven and the fire serpents. So, dating from the 2nd century, the so-called Chaldean oracles of Zoroaster preserve what is probably a Neoplatonic synthesis of Babylonian and Greek cosmological theories. And notice that the Chaldean name for Godhead is Father, meaning progenitor, one who generates or emanates. So let's take a look. In the Chaldean or Babylonian scheme of the heavens, the highest beings are the intelligibles. They call that the paternal or fatherly bithos, or depth, and the first mind, nous. This is the world of supra-mundane light. It's a world of light and fire. And the intelligible triad is father and mother and mind. Paul talks about the nous, or the mind of Christ, possibly some relationship to this. So that's the first mind. That would be, in Kabbalistic terms, what we would call the supernal triad. The second mind, the intelligibles and intellectuals in the Empyrean world, that's in the heavenly world, are the inges, which are wheels like the Hebrew cherubim, and the synarchies, which are forces that bind things together, and the teletarchai, the initiatic forces that perfect the soul. And at the third level, in the third nous, the third mind, there are the intellectuals, or what would be called in Vedic astrology the manas, or the higher mind in the ethereal world. There are three cosmogogai, that is, three that lead the world, and they are intellectual guides, and three amalisti, which are also related to the characteristics of thunder. And then in the elementary world, the hypozokos, the flower of fire, we have the demiurge of the material universe, the creator of the material universe, the effable, essential, and elemental orders of the earth and matter, and so on. And this is one of the sources. This is one source for a lot of Gnostic thought. It is also, however, very closely related to Kabbalistic thought. So let's take a look at that. The Kabbalistic scheme of the heavens begins with Ein and Ein Sof, and Ein Sof are the limitless light, the boundless, the illimitable light, the world of Atziluth, or of God. And that relates to the radiant triangle, which is a supernal triangle that is formed in the world of Bria. Divine forces, we have Keter, Bina, and Chachma. And in the world of Yetzirah, we have Gebura, Hesed, Tiferet, Hod, Yesod, and Netzach. And in Malkuth, in the world of Asiya, ruled by Adonai Melech, by the Lord God, and under that earth and matter and so on. You can see that there's a very close relationship to the Kabbalistic scheme and the Babylonian scheme. And one of the things that characterizes them and brings them together is the concept of fire, the concept of divine fire, heavenly fire. So let's look at this divine fire, or this divine spark that the Kabbalists talk about as the image of God that resides in each of us. It's a fire, it's a spark. If we examine a few verses of the Chaldean oracles as preserved among Hellenistic writers, we can get a better idea of the divine fire that Yeshua makes parallel to the sovereignty, the Malkuth. These are numbered. I'm including the numbers with the verses. I'm just taking a small selection to give you a flavor of the divine fire. Number 13, all things have issued from that one fire. The Father perfected all things and delivered them over to the second mind, whom the nations of men call the first. That's from Sellas, by the way. We get a lot of these quotations in the early Greek writers who are quoting from the Chaldean oracles. The soul, being a brilliant fire by the power of the Father, remaineth immortal, and is mistress of life, and filleth up the many recesses of the bosom of the world. For not in matter did the fire, which is in the first, beyond, enclose his active power, but in mind. For the framer of the fiery world is the mind of mind, nous of nous, who first sprang from mind, nous, clothing the one fire with the other fire, binding them together that he might mingle the fountainous craters while preserving unsullied the brilliance of his own fire. And thence a fiery whirlwind, drawing down the brilliance of the flashing flame, penetrating the abysses of the universe, for from thence downwards do extend their wondrous rays. This, by the way, is probably a description of what we read in the Hermetic literature, the very first one, the great revelation of the Hermetic prophet, which is something that we study in another seminar, but basically the vision of the creation of all things begins with this fiery whirlwind drawing down the brilliance of the flashing flame, etc., in the very first tractate, the Poimandres, Shepherd of Men. For the Father of gods and men placed mind, nous, in the soul, suke, and placed both in the human body. The paternal mind hath sowed symbols in the soul, having mingled the vital spark from two according substances, mind and divine spirit. As a third to these he added holy love, the venerable charioteer uniting all things. You see, it's very Neoplatonic. The love is the fourth element in the Empedoclean idea of the universe of Eros. That's that which binds things together. These are the synoke, the things that bind things together in this system. Even in the early Babylonian apocalypses of Enoch, the high heavens contained fire serpents, the seraphim, and the luminous bodies of fire, including the phoenix of the sun. The human essential divine nature was described as a spark of divine fire emanating from Godhead. At the firmament or boundary between the supernal triad of Keter, Hakma, Bina, according to the ancient Sefer Yetzirah, was the mother letter Shin, associated with Esh, divine fire. So this is the divine fire. When Yeshua speaks about divine fire that he's bringing, he's not talking about the fire of testing that goes with the birth pangs of the Messiah. He's talking about the divine fire, the same kind of divine fire that Prometheus brought down to the earth and for which he was punished so severely. The fire of intelligence, of mind, of divine spirit and divine mind. So Logian 82 is translated from a Devar of Yeshua, whose meaning would have been understood by his close disciples. Being those of his inner circle, they were near to the divine fire, and thus to the Malkuth, and those who opposed, rejected, or choose to remain far from him were also far away from the Malkuth. Well, Logian 83 gives us a chance to go over the real esoteric stuff here, and the very definitely Kabbalistic stuff. I have put it back into the Aramaic and the Hebrew Kabbalistic concepts, because when people translate this, they just translate words like the images are this and all this sort of thing. But here's what it says. It says, the Zelamim are perceivable by mankind, but the divine light in them remains hidden in the Zelam of the light of the Father. He will be revealed, but his Zelam will remain concealed by his light. Whoa. Okay, the Greek loanword icon, translated Hebrew Aramaic Zelam, image. The divine Zelam, or image, was the image of God embedded in the heart of humanity at its creation, as in the first chapter of Genesis. And God said, and the Elohim said, let us create the mankind, humanity, in our image and in our likeness. And the word create is Yetzer, from which we get the good and evil Yetzer and the good and evil formations. And the word for image and likeness is Zelam and Damut. And what we're talking about here is the image of God, the Zelam. So the Zelamim are the plural, the images. So someone might translate this as the images are perceivable by mankind, but the divine light of them remains hidden in the image of the light of the Father. Well, what we're talking about now is this Kabbalistic creation idea. So the divine Zelam was the image of God embedded in the heart of humanity at its creation. And if this were a Kabbalistic teaching of Yeshua to his inner circle, it would mean that the image of God is hidden in all things visible to mankind, but is itself invisible because it is one with the nature of divine light, the Ein Sof Or. And I think it is. I think this is a Kabbalistic statement. Now, the image of God is not a thing that can be seen by light emitted from the human eye. Remember, the theory was that light was emitted from the human eye. That was the theory of emission, which was disproven about the year 900 or something like that by an Arabic philosopher who came up with the theory of intromission, that light comes into the eye, and therefore laid the basis for the science of optics. But in Yeshua's understanding, and that of all the Hellenistic world, light came out of the eye, like your finger reaches forward, your hand reaches forward to touch things, and light comes out to see things of sense objects. So here it's saying the image of God is not a thing that can be seen by light emitted from the human eye, but is constituted of the Ein Sof Or. So just as we cannot see the surface of the sun because its light overpowers our vision, that is, a divine light prevents the light emitted from our eyes from accessing its surface, according to that theory, so mankind cannot see the image of God, which consists of divine light. Nevertheless, we are told in the Devar that time will come when God will be revealed to mankind in the coming Malkuth, but even then, God's image will remain hidden in divine light. He will be revealed, but his Zelam will remain concealed by his light. So this divine light was also considered to be the glory or Shekinah of God, which in Sefer Yetzirah was divided into 32 paths of wisdom or Chachma, which was synonymous with God's feminine Shekinah or manifestation. So you can see that God is there, but you can't see what God's image is. You can just see the light. Light is what God is. Moses stood on a mountain but remained on earth and saw only with his physical eyes. Peter and James and John saw Moses and Elijah in the light of their partial ascent, their partial Merkaba ascent with Yeshua, but they saw only their Zelamim, not the divine Zelam of God. They saw the images of Moses and Elijah. However, Isaac, Enoch, and Yeshua ascended to the Merkaba, the throne of God, in the spark of their own divine Zelamim, their own image. And the mechanism of light emission from the physical eyes, as it was understood then, was not operative in that modality. They saw with a divine faculty to serve as God's eye, as described in Logia 22. Thus, even in the coming Malkuth on earth, human eyes will not be able to see God's image, only his manifestations. And that's what this means. And it doesn't stop there. When you perceive your damutot, you rejoice, but when you will perceive your zelamim, which came into being before you, and which neither die nor become manifest, how much will you be able to bear? Some footnotes here. Remember, the Elohim created man in the zelam, the image, and damut, likeness, in their image and likeness, and it's plural, Elohim. And the Kabbalistic understanding of that was very important. It was the first chapter of Genesis. It became the real hotbed of Kabbalistic interpretation. Your damutot is a plural for damut, which we translate in the King James Bible as likeness, and this would be likenesses. And these would be your personal affinities and likenesses reflected in other people and things outside of you. If you see somebody else who's got what your idea of beauty is, then you're seeing one of your likenesses. But your zelamim, a zelam, the zelamim are primordial or archetypal and invisible divine forces, energies, and motions, the images of Godhead. They're not visible. The image of God is not a visible image like the image of an idol carved in wood, even though the word zelam comes from a word related to an image in wood. So the image is not a graphic, but the damutot is an affinity towards something that you're like. So a damut is a personal affinity and likeness that you see reflected in other people and things outside of you because it's your own personal preference, your own likeness. And your zelam is a primordial or archetypal and invisible divine force or energy or motion that is the zelam of Godhead. It is the image of God. It is a divine spark in you. It's like fire. Now this appears to be a continuation of Logia 83, of this Kabbalistic conversation. It concludes with a rhetorical comment typical of rabbinic discourse like that of Logia 11, what will you do? Here it is, how much you will have to bear, or how much will you have to bear? The point of the comment is to emphasize the transcendent wonder of what has just been said. So in these Kabbalistic remembrances, or these Kabbalistic short Kabbalistic comments, they very often end with, what will you then do? Or, and all this sort of thing. It's a rhetorical thing. It's rabbinic and it's Kabbalistic. In the commentary to Logian 3, I introduced the Kabbalistic interpretation of the formation of mankind in Genesis 1:26, found in Hellenistic wisdom school and Talmudic tradition. In order to understand the original terminology of this Logian, we need to examine the Hebrew words for image and likeness. The Hebrew word that was used to describe the divine image or fire or spark within mankind was zelem. It referred not to a physical image, but to the essential nature of something, good or evil. The word damut, likeness, referred to similarity. Again, not a physical similarity, but an essential likeness, an affinity. The word for a physical form or image seen with the eyes was to'ar, which is not used here. God could not be ever represented with a to'ar, with an idol or an image. And the word icon is something we could never use. But of course, the people in Coptic did, and even in Greek they did. Icon, an image, visual image. So the image and likeness of Godhead constitutes the divine image, the imago Dei. This is invisible. This image is invisible. One would refer to a Jewish saint or a tzaddik as a son of Godhead, not because of a visible image, but because he shared in the divine nature. And that nature was described in the many names of God, such as crowned head, Keter, wisdom, Chachma, understanding, Bina, constituting the names of the supernal triad of the Kabbalistic tree, with others like justice, compassion, and beauty, which you find in the rest of the later medieval tree. These all describe the zelem of Godhead. This was the image of God, and as names, each was a damut, or likeness of Godhood. Justice is a likeness. Compassion is a likeness. So if you are a perfect tree, you have in you all the 10 sephirot, which are the names of God, which are the damut, or likenesses of God. And the tree as a whole is the zelem, so to speak. The means by which the divine image communicated with a person within yourself was through motions or impulses in the heart, and taken collectively they constituted the Yetzer Hatov, the good impulse, the good Yetzer. And that's how the divine image communicated with you. But there was also the flip side, the Yetzer Hara, the evil nature, the evil impulse. So Thomas Logian 84 may have underlay the following Logian of the Gospel of Philip. Blessed is he who is before he came into being, for he who is, has been, and shall be. And this says, when you see that which came into being before you, and which neither die nor become manifest, how much will you be able to bear? Adam came into being with marvelous endowments from a great heavenly host, but he did not become worthy of you. If he had been worthy, he would not have experienced death. Here's Adam Kadmon, the primal humanity, androgynous, male, female, not yet divided into Adam and Eve. This is the way it's represented sometimes by artists. In accordance with Genesis 1:26, which specifies that Adam was constructed or formed by consent and activity of the Elohim, here Yeshua indicates that primal humanity was created from all the energies of the heavenly host. It's very much like the Gnostics would say. The literal Coptic text reads, Adam came into being out of a great power and a great abundance. I've translated it through the lens of Aramaic to read, Adam came into being with marvelous endowments from a great heavenly host. And that would be the original meaning. And that was the meaning that was taken over into some of the early Gnostic documents. And when you saw the formation of Adam and how every part on the left and the right came from these different angels and so on. The Kabbalistic concept, however, of Adam Kadmon was similar to the Pythagorean Platonic concept of the human soul as a microcosm, containing within it all the powers and forces of the macrocosmos, or manifest cosmos, the great universe. Adam contained within him, to speak Kabbalistically, all the host of heaven, all the angels, all the angelic host was within Adam, all their characteristics. So such was the great wealth that produced the first Adam. The phrase, but he, Adam, did not become worthy of you, has several implications. It doesn't say he was not worthy, but did not become worthy. He didn't develop that way. In other words, the first humanity, the old humanity, did not develop worthiness over time. Yeshua, in his dialogue with the Pharisees about the so-called resurrection, said, but for those who are worthy of the Kima, meaning those who have sanctified their lives and purified their hearts. Worthiness is moral and spiritual. It's developed over time. It is not something one is born possessing, but earns in life. Logia 46 offers an important point in it, as in the Q saying above. Yeshua says, whichever one of you comes into being as a newly born will know the Malkuth and will become superior to John. In other words, though Logia 85 seems to imply that disciples are already greater than John, in Yeshua's halakha they were in process, not yet superior to John. The wording here, worthy of you, should not be taken to mean that the disciples are greater than John, but that they have the potential to be so. They're becoming like the newly born child of 7 days of Logia 4, see that commentary, meaning newly spiritually reborn in the Malkuth, whose wisdom would be sought by the great elders of Israel, but they have not yet achieved that status. So the conclusion of the Kabbalistic argument offers proof that the first Adam was not worthy of the blessings of the second Adam. Quote, if he had been worthy, he would not have experienced death. Like Elijah, he would have been bodily assumed into heaven so that Shaitan could not possess even his flesh, or even, and certainly not his bones. So what did Yeshua understand about not experiencing death? First, his terms, life and death, did not refer to the flesh. Life was the spiritual life of the Olam, of God's world, of God's Malkuth, which could be experienced while in flesh. For him, death meant spiritual death, which was a loss of the soul. For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Here the Aramaic word for soul was probably not nephesh, as often translated suke in the Greek Septuagint, since the nephesh was understood to dissolve in Kabbalistic doctrine after normal death. It may have been the Aramaic word lev, or lebab, meaning heart. This would probably encompass then ruach, neshama, and yachida. So for him, spiritual death was a consequence of moral abuse, selfishness, and attachment to material rather than spiritual values. It probably meant the nephesh had separated itself so extremely from its own heart, or spiritual reality, that even the purifications of Gehenna could not make it admissible to the pardes of the third heaven. It would remain lost in darkness and separation from God, Israel, and from its higher divine nature and higher principles. It might become an instrument of Shaitan and the fallen angels that would survive by draining vital force from incarnate beings as a possessing entity until eventually dissolving back into the elements. So to never experience death would be to never experience separation from God or the consciousness of one's own true nature. The foxes have their holes and the birds have their nests, but the Bar Enosh has no place on earth to lay his head and rest. The homelessness of the Son of Man Messiah on earth was not intended to imply that his true home was heaven, and he was merely forced to pass through life on earth, although that's probably what it meant to the Gnostics. Yeshua's view of the Bar Enosh was that of a divine co-sovereign with Godhead, whose mission was to overthrow the rule of Shaitan and establish the sovereignty of heaven on earth. So when Yeshua observed that there was no home on earth for the Bar Enosh, he meant that there was no home as yet. The Son of Mankind Messiah was foreign to the world. He was entering into a hostile human world. It was neither prepared nor welcoming. Yet he and his Malkuth would prevail. Humanity would be purified and sanctified so that the Malkuth would manifest in and through mankind. The good will of God would be done on earth by mankind as it was in heaven. The earth and the entire cosmos eagerly await the revealing of the sons of God. As Paul said, it was not just the individual soul of the elect one, but the entire world that was to be transformed. Paul is transmitting the messianic cosmology he received from historical disciples of Yeshua when he declares, the earnest expectation of the whole creation eagerly awaits for the revealing of the sons of God, for the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the sons of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. And note in this one statement of Paul that we're not talking about the Son of God, but the sons, plural, of God. We're all destined to become Christs. The Bar-Anash is a corporate being. So this is quite different from the view of the Gnostics, to whom the earth was a lost cause, a demiurgical mistake, a fallen world. It was a hellish prison of flesh from whom the elect were destined to escape to their heavenly home under the leadership of their Revealer and Savior Christ. '87. The flesh that clings to flesh will shatter, and the soul that clings to these two will also shatter. The Devar says that just as flesh dissolves after death, so will the soul that clings to flesh as the only form of reality also dissolve. I've used the term soul rather than the Hebrew nephesh because while the discarnate personality, the nephesh, dissolves back into its elements about 40 days after death, according to Kabbalistic theory, it has served the body of the neshama connected by ruach, and it served as the body of the neshama, the higher principles, connected by spirit. In the case of a disciple, his consciousness will withdraw into the neshama through the sulam, or heavenly staircase, or Jacob's ladder of spirit, ruach, because spiritual integration has been accomplished in the works of incarnate life. But in the case of one who is divided, or is se'ef, disconnected from his higher realities, the soul that clings to flesh and the man of flesh, these two, the consciousness that has developed in life will dissolve. The soul will be lost, not the immortal Yahida, which will emanate another physical incarnation through the neshama, but the continuity of consciousness that exists for those worthy of the Kama. So to paraphrase it, the person of flesh consciousness who depends only upon his simple material reality will find that after death it eventually dissolves, and the soul that clings to the person of flesh and his simple consciousness will also dissolve. Now let's examine the Hebrew concept of a soul. The later Kabbalistic writings preserve the Jewish mystical understanding of the 6 vessels subsumed under the New Testament categories of soma, suke, and pneuma, body, soul, and spirit. And these categories are basar, flesh, meat, physical body, the flesh that decomposes after death. Nephesh, that's the personality, the lower animal nature, the astral sidereal body composed of subtle ethers that survives death about 40 days and dissolves back into its subtle elements in a second death. This contains the mortal mind and perception and personality and gender individuality of the deceased, probably derived from the Egyptian Ka and Kaibit, shadow. And that is not permanent, that's impermanent, but it survives death. And after death, people still feel like they're John Smith or whoever they are for a certain amount of time. Now the Ruach is the spirit, and that it's released and ascends when the Nephesh disintegrates at the second death. There's no gender to Ruach. It's probably derived from the Egyptian Ba. And the Neshama is the soul that is incarnated at birth and survives death for purgatory and paradise. There's no eternal hell in Kabbalistic teaching. No gender. It's capable of limited understanding concerning God and the highest Olamim. It's probably derived from the Egyptian Aku. And the Chaya is the spiritual nous, the mind, the Hermetic Greek term, or the understanding of the Neshama that can experience the vision of God. It's the Pauline mind of Christ, probably derived from the Egyptian Sahu. It's androgynous like the angels, and that is the form that people are in the Chema. And the Yahida is the highest aspect of the human subtle constitution through which a Zaddik or realized saint achieves divine union with God. And it's feminine, like all the rest of these words, because the soul of the Zaddik becomes like the bride of God. It's possibly derived from the Pythagorean Greek monos. Unlike the monad, which was a neuter term synonymous with Godhead, Yahida is a Hebrew feminine term. The individual being at its highest expression is feminine to Godhead, who is masculine Yahid. Angels and the prophets will come to you and give you those things you already have, and you will reciprocate by offering them those things which you have, and say to yourselves, when will they come and take what is theirs? You see, we have a series of Kabbalistic, short Kabbalistic sayings or teachings about death and about the soul, and we've been the Damut and the Zelim and all this sort of thing. And here we finally lead to this. He's talking to his disciples and he's telling them what to expect after they die. So all these logias seem to be aspects of Kabbalistic teachings about death, and Logian 88 refers specifically to the after-death realities that the disciples will discover, maybe also experience in Merkaba visions. And here Yeshua prepares his disciples for the reception in heaven after death. Now, the convention of gift-giving and receiving was that when one entered into another's home or sovereign place, he was given gifts, food, drink, hospitality, perhaps other gifts. He then must reciprocate by offering gifts to the host. But what can the disciples offer? They must offer the treasure they have accumulated in their hearts. But the angels and prophets of heaven do not come to accept the reciprocal gifts. So the disciples wonder, when will they come and take what is theirs? So the paradox is that unlike human gifting conventions, Godhead and those in heaven do not lack. They need nothing because they are shalem, spiritually whole, complete and perfected. You can offer them gifts. They will not be refused, for that would be quite non-host worthy, but they will never come to accept them. Instead, they are givers only. So the angels and the prophets will come to you and give you those things you already have, and you will reciprocate by offering them those things which you have and say to yourselves, when will they come and take what is theirs?